Okay, we are going to start the session. First, I would like to invite all the presenters to sit in front of the auditorium. So I would like to invite to Pierre, Bruno, Ricardo, and Anna. Okay, and welcome everyone to the session of Data Science for Public Policy. My name is Jorge Poco, and I will be the chair of this session. Okay, we are going to have the presentation of the 4 speakers, around 20 minutes each one, and we are going to have the question at the end of the whole presentation, okay? So first, I would like to introduce Pierre-Louis Petrillo from the University of Rome to give the presentation Algorithmic in Public Decision-Making Process, a Comparative Perspective. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. No, it's okay. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank FGV for inviting me and for the wonderful organization of this event. I will be very briefly, well, my topic is about the role of algorithms in public decision makers. I will try to stress 4 points. The first is related to the aims of algorithms. The second is related to the origin of the algorithms. The third about their accountability, and the last one about the issues of privacy. But before, we have to understand what does it mean, what algorithm means. In 2018, in New York, the mayor of the city decided to establish a task force of experts for supporting him in the governance of algorithms, and especially to support him for the automated decision system. Well, this task force of experts spent about one year to understand the meanings of algorithms. How to define it was not clear. For example, the task force questioning whether the use of an Excel spreadsheet was qualified as automated decision system. If I use this, it is a sort of algorithm or not. This fact represents the complexity of this topic, but we can simplify and we can use the definition that is provided in a computer science textbook. So we can say that the algorithm is a numerical calculation scheme normally placed at the basis of computer and software process. So the first issue is why in the public decision makers, a lot of public decision makers decide to use algorithms. Well, the utilization of this kind of automated decision system try to simplify the decision. For example, if you think at what happened during the pandemic situation, at the beginning, we have a lot of people to vaccinated, and we have very few vaccine. So several countries decide to use algorithms to decide to which person give the vaccine. But another issue is relating, for example, social policies. If the government has to decide how to allocate public housing among the many poor people in a city, in several situations use algorithms. So we can say that this kind of system can help in the decision makers, but the algorithm is never impartial. And this is the second issue that I want to stress today. Who processes the algorithms? Because there is a question of transparency in the formation of the algorithms. And democracies, constitution, legislations provide forms of transparency in public decision-making process. But this kind of norms ensure the transparency of typified decision-making process, such as legislative or administrative. Algorithm writing is not subject to these forms of transparency. Writing the algorithm is often outsourced to information technology company outside the public decision makers. Procurement to information companies raised another questions because there are often confidentiality constraints and it's not possible to know how the algorithm was written. So algorithmic procurement raises questions about responsibilities, about discretion in design and decision making, and policy making. When governments procure algorithmic systems from vendors, they are sometimes left in the dark about the details of how system works. There is another issue about the third issue about accountability. In Boston, several years ago, the municipality decided to use algorithmic to redefine public bus routes. Well, at the end, the outcome was a very significant efficiency gain in public resource. But citizens complained about the new rules, and initiated a lobbying action against the city government to prevent the implementation of the algorithm. It was very nice that the slogan used by the citizen lobbyists was "Families against algorithms." The slogan shows the basic error. The algorithm was not wrong. The government had asked for a solution to make the public transportation system more efficient, ignoring the needs of citizens. The mistake has been the government's, not the computers. But the government, in this case, had its time hiding behind the algorithms by saying it will give orders to change it. So that means that sometimes, in some occasions, in several occasions, the algorithm becoming scapegoating behind which policy can hide its responsibilities. So there is another issue about accountability when use algorithms in public decision makers. And then the last issue is about privacy. Because data are essential to avoid critical situations when you elaborate an algorithm. But which kind of data? If we use the data provided by, for example, public municipalities, probably the municipality has information only about the people that have a relation with the municipality, that use, for example, public service, but not about whole people in the city. So it's important to share this information with, for example, information provided by private sectors. So it's important to aggregate more data, but aggregating so much data poses significant privacy issues. There is another history. In a small county in Florida, the school board and the State Department of Child decide to collect data on students to support educational goals and the health of children and families. But this data have also been combined by the Pasco Sheriff Office. And together with this data, the Sheriff Office creates an archive where indicate students with a high potential risk to be in the future criminals. The effects of this aggregating data was the families decide to change the school and not to leave our child in the same class where there is potential criminal in the future. So there is a very strong problems, especially because it is true that data integration is essential to have more effective algorithms, but it's also true that data integration risks subjecting the citizen to total control and creating information monster, like the information monster described in George Orwell novel 1984. So, very briefly, we have several problems related the use of algorithms in public decision process. In Europe was approved several regulations to try to define a common solution. For example, in 2016, the European Union approved a regulation on the protection of individuals with regards to the processing of personal data. In France was approved in the same years a general law on the use of algorithms in administrative procedures. In Italy there is no a law on this topic, but the judge decided in a recent case that is it possible to use algorithm in administrative activity, but it's necessary to guarantee the transparency of the writing of the algorithm. So this is a new issue, and it happened in several cases that when a new issues arise, there is a new opportunity for implementation of human rights and fundamental rights. But without regulations, there is an high risk that the use of algorithms can reduce the space for rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierre. So our next speaker is going to be Bruno Barzanetti from FGV CPDOC. He's going to present his work about historical indigenous presence and deforestation in the Amazon. Thank you, Bruno.
Okay, thank you, Jorge. You guys can hear me, right? Yes. This is where. Okay. So first of all, just let me tell. This is joint work with Alipe Ferreira. That's who is. I think the mic's not working. So, okay. Can you guys hear me better now? Okay, perfect. So this is joint work with Alipe Ferreira, currently at JPAL. He's going to Southern Methodist University next year, who's a great environmental economist. And in this project, it's a broader project. We're working on trying to get historical data from past indigenous groups, and we hope that there are other uses beyond this particular project that I'm presenting now. But let me talk briefly about the motivation we have here. And so when you look at deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon, it's a very recent phenomenon. So it's really started to take off in the 1970s, and since then, around 20% of the forest in Brazil has been deforested. So it's become very important, for us in academia, to understand what are the drivers and the main determinants of deforestation, and there are a lot of work, a lot of papers dealing with that, but mostly focusing on what are short-run determinants, things like what happens if you build a road, or what happens if crop prices change, and questions like that. But an important thing is to keep in mind that although deforestation, there's recently settlement of forest regions is very old, dates back to millennia, and on top of that, it was these regions experience a very violent history. So if you look at the Amazon, you'll see a lot of colonial conquest, you see a lot of conflict for land, slavery, and phenomena like that. Moreover, we know that deforestation seems to track where is economic activity, and we know from the literature that the spatial distribution of economic activity seems to be often characterized by history dependence. So a natural question is, despite the fact that deforestation is recent, are like history or long-run determinants important for us to understand where deforestation is occurring. And so what we do in this paper, what's our contribution? We show a very interesting, in my opinion, a very interesting scientific fact that when you look at the location of indigenous groups that have been extinct in the past, these locations, they feature way more deforestation today. And so this is like the main finding we document. And let me explain a little bit better like how we do that. So like to obtain this, we first would georeference this ethno-historic map with the location of indigenous groups in the Brazilian Amazon. And then this is a very rich data that then we compare with spatial data, mostly remote sensing data on where deforestation is, on land use, on the location of economic activity. And basically what we will find is that this early indigenous presence and the early and the extinction of these groups in the past can be traced to modern deforestation. So this is this correlation that we looked. And so we first document that the locations close to where there were indigenous groups in the past do not seem to feature more or less deforestation, unless if the group was extinct. And basically what we find is that if there is one group in the neighborhood of a region that was extinct in the past, this region has like the share of that piece of land that is deforested increased by 6 percentage points, which is a large effect. It's roughly like 40% of deforestation in the Amazon. We also will be using like this very rich ethnohistoric data to show that this association is especially strong if violence seems to be an important reason for the extinction of that group. And then we also look at other variables, and we find that like these extinctions are correlated to land tenure, to roads, and other types of infrastructure. So before I describe more in detail what we do, let me just point out that what we have here is not a causal effect of extinction on deforestation today. But we think that these findings are very interesting from a scientific point of view, and some interesting aspects of that is first that we'll be using extinction data that is from before the 1940s. So these extinctions clearly precede deforestation. The second thing is that our findings are robust to the inclusion of a lot of concerns about selection, either in terms of the differences in geographical characteristics across space, but also differences in some characteristics of these indigenous groups that might have been extinct relative to groups that were not. And also the strategy we use allows us to account for unobservable characteristics that might be related similarly to the location of extinct and non-extinct groups. We try to be very careful, and I can talk more later on how we try to consider the fact that this is historical data, and so it's prone to a lot of measurement error. But there are very interesting ways we can account for some of those issues of measurement error. And finally, another interesting aspect of what we find is that these historical presence predicts both accumulated and ongoing deforestation, the new deforestation that's going on. And this kind of suggests that these historical extinctions, they are related to characteristics, local characteristics that make a region to be more or less prone to deforestation. So what's the main takeaway? How do we interpret these findings? Is that the historical ways in which different regions of the Amazon were settled in the past affected these local conditions, local institutions, like who owns the land, the type of infrastructure that's there, and this drives, in turn, deforestation in the long run. So we shouldn't see this extinction as really causing that, but most likely they are a proxy about how violent or how this historical settlement occurred. So, being more specific, what exactly we do? Our main contribution is to take this very rich and important source from ethnography, which is the ethnohistoric map of Curtin de Moendaju. And Curtin de Moendaju was a very important ethnographer here in Brazil in the early 20th century. And in the 1940s, he prepared this large-scale map that contained information on over 2,000 indigenous groups throughout Brazil and surrounding areas. He used almost 1,000 historical sources, and he included a lot of very rich information on like the dates, the precise location, names, languages, and importantly for what we'll be doing, the extinction status in 1944 of those populations. So this is the original map, like the manuscript mapped from 1944, but actually we use this version that's a more recent digital version. So basically what we'll be doing, we'll be georeferencing that and cataloging this map very well, so we can use this as a tool, like as some data in a quantitative analysis. So just to highlight how the map is rich, like this is a small fragment of the map and contains like many different groups, so you can see like some names. These colors indicate the language that those groups speak. Maybe it's hard to see from there, but there are like dates on where like these groups were, and you can see that like some of those lines, they are dashed, and they indicate that this group went extinct. And so this is the type of information we use. So the first part of our project, we georeference this map, we catalog and try to very carefully include all this rich information that this map gives us. And we also did, and I'll talk more later, for the groups that went extinct, we went back to the original historical sources to try to catalog and understand like what were the likely causes those groups went extinct. And so basically what we have on this map, here we have the distribution of those groups in the map in the Brazilian Amazon. So we will be focusing on the Brazilian Amazon for our analysis, even though the map is wider. And you see that those groups in red, they are all groups, and the ones in black are the ones that went extinct. And our exercise basically consists of correlating this map of the location of the groups with the map on the right that indicates where deforestation is occurring in the Brazilian Amazon. So how we do that, we estimate this linear model in which we have our sample is a very fine grid of the Brazilian Amazon, and in each grid cell we can measure how much deforestation there is. And then we can see how that correlates with two things. One, how many groups in the map there are within a radius of 20 kilometers from that grid cell, and how many extinct groups there are. And so basically what we do is that we be interested in that coefficient beta 2, which indicates this differential association with proximity to an extinct group relative to a non-extinct group. And to show like this correlation will show that it will be very robust to the inclusion of a large number of characteristics related to that grid cell. So here we have our main results. Let me just point out for the second column in the coefficient on the top, what does that indicate? It indicates that on a grid cell of roughly 1,600 hectares, if there is an extinct group in the neighborhood of that grid cell, deforestation is larger by another 100 hectares. So this is a sizable and important effect, and seems quite robust as we add other concerns. More importantly, those results I was showing you was deforestation up to 2010, accumulated deforestation up to 2010. We can repeat the same exercise for different years, and we see that the impact on deforestation seems to increase over time. So this proximity to extinct groups predict also deforestation not only in 2010, but this increase in deforestation from 2010 to the present day. So like this additional ongoing deforestation. And also more interesting, what you see on the graph on the right is the same coefficient on the forest cover from a different source on deforestation that allows us to go back in time to 1985, like more close to the onset of large-scale deforestation in the Amazon, and we see that the effects are much smaller by then and not statistically significant. So this is happening recently, and it's affecting both accumulated but also ongoing deforestation. So we look at some other findings. So we look at land use, and we show that these proximity to extinct groups are associated with more pastures and more like urban activity in that region. And we look at some variables that we tend to think as determinants or correlates of deforestation, things like roads, the location of private farms, the location of indigenous reserves, and we find that like proximity to extinct groups predict more roads, more private farms in a region, and less indigenous protected areas, even though neither of those variables explain the relationship, all of the relationship that we document. So going to the conclusion, a question we had was to understand, okay, we are talking about extinction. What does extinction mean? And there are many ways in which groups have been extinct in the past. And so one of the reasons is it's due to things like violence. So there was like a lot of conflict. There were like, if you look at the sources, you find like some groups that like, they were targeted in slave raids or by war with settlers or with other indigenous groups. And so this is like kind of one way in which a group could be extinct. But there's also a lot of assimilation. And something that marks the history of the Amazon also is a lot of what we call the aldeamentos, that are like kind of missionary activities that concentrated indigenous groups that, unlike groups that were targeted and went extinct due to violence, those groups probably assimilated more to the broader society. So we could imagine that this correlation might be different in different regions. So what we decided to do, we went to all these over 100 groups that went extinct in the map in the Brazilian Amazon, and we went to a systematic search in the sources that Courtney Muendaju had for those entries to try to understand like what do we know about extinctions, and roughly half of them were related to violence, roughly half of them were related to aldeamentos, and then there were like some that were related to both, and so as you can see here. And by doing that, what we can look at these heterogeneity by the likely type of extinction of a group. And the exercise we do that is then we include these, not only the variable for the number of groups that went extinct, but also the number of groups that went extinct and are associated with aldeamento, and the ones that are associated with violence. And as you can see in those results, the results are especially strong for groups that the historical sources mention some kind of violence as a likely cause for their extinction, and so this is what's driving that relationship that we discuss. More interesting, this heterogeneity holds not only for deforestation, but also for some other variables, and especially for land tenure, for the share of the grid cell that's covered by private farms. So we think this land grabbing motive might have been associated with that. So just to conclude, I think I might be running out of time. So what do? We ask this question: does the historical indigenous presence predict this recent deforestation of the Amazon? And one answer is no. Like the mere presence does not seem to be associated with more deforestation, but yes, the presence of extinct groups in a region seems to be associated with more deforestation. How do you answer this question? The main contribution is to work with this very comprehensive and amazing data set on ethnohistoric indigenous groups locations that we hope could be useful for other work. And what we do, we compare with like a large set of very rich and fine spatial data, mostly remote sensing data, especially on deforestation, to find this very robust correlation between extinctions and modern day deforestation. As the main potential channels, we have hypothesized that these local economic institutions associated with infrastructure and who owns the land seems to be in part explaining what we see. And this seems to be also corroborated by when you look at this type of extinction, that violence events are the ones that are driving the correlation. But just to highlight that, like, these are not causal effects, and we like to think of that as a first step in trying to understand how history has shaped deforestation today, so we have a better understanding of this phenomenon and try to understand like which type of policies could work or not to curb it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno, for your presentation. Okay, our next speaker is going to be Ricardo Lopez Cardoso from FGV EBAPE. He's going to talk about predicting municipality with risk of soil mismanagement using machine learning. Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you, Poco. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here again and be able to present this piece of research. I'm Ricardo. I worked in this project with Professor Philippe Buschbinder and Luna. Luna is a student in our master program, and she works for the general controller, internal control mechanism in the central government in Brazil, from where this data comes from and where the research problem just pop up. So the title Poco had read, Predicting Municipality Risk of Resource Mismanagement. Just before getting to the project, just to highlight that this research project is embedded in our research center, the Applied Research Center in Account and Analytics at EBAPE, FGV. And the priority theme is how does this internal control body in the central government decides which municipalities to audit. Just to make clear here that here in Brazil we have a very huge mechanism of fiscal decentralization, where the central government transfers funds to the local governments, and then once we have that kind of mechanism, those municipalities that are benefited from the transfer are subjected to accountability, transparency, and in addition to that, they are subject to the auditing from the internal control mechanism that here we call CGU. So, actually, this auditing body simply runs a selection process, a random selection process, where it selects no more than 1% of the municipalities that receive the funds to be audited. So last year, how many municipalities received the funds? This year, they will select no more than 1% of them to actually audit their numbers and trying to identify whether there are some evidences of malversation of the public resource tunneling or corruption, whatever. So this is quite a traditional auditing mechanism. Actually, nowadays, in most of the auditing firms that audit listed companies in the stock exchange also use a small sample random selection process to decide which transactions will be subject to substantive auditing analysis. But in the private sector, they have been working on a transition, a shift toward more audit analysis, using data science, what they call audit analytics, to audit the entire sample, searching for suspicious transactions. And then once the suspicious transactions are actually identified, then they go further in detailed document analysis and so on. So our suggestion is not that new. We are not reinventing anything here. We are not building a new hill. We are suggesting to transfer this kind of knowledge from the private sector to the public sector. So our suggestion is machine learning models instead of that rafting random sampling mechanism. So learning tools of management, of mismanagement from historical data, search all municipalities for signs of possible mismanagement, and then flag those suspicious transactions that later on would be further inspected by the internal audit body. Sorry. So this is the way like that common say, if it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck. It's most likely that's a duck. The same idea of the suspicious transactions. So move away from random sampling auditing towards a risk-based approach driven by analytics of the entire population, searching for suspicious events and so on. Just to highlight that the International Association of Supreme Audit Institutions, that today called the acronym INTOSAI, also suggests governmental auditing bodies to move forward a more risk-based approach in order to enhance the effectiveness of their activities. So this project is embedded in that idea as well. So to develop a machine learning model to assess how likely a given municipality is to suffer from resource mismanagement is the key objective of our research. But why? Simply because the auditing organization efforts to those municipalities are the most likely to have some kind of mismanagement, thereby increasing the efficiency of the auditing process, detecting mismanagement, and induce better management of public resources. The feeling we have sometimes, not scientifically saying, but just reading the newspapers, is that in most of the circumstances, the value for money of governmental audit is not that reasonable. Sometimes I feel like the cost of the auditing is higher than the benefit that the auditing organizations provide, unfortunately. Not on a scientific perspective, only reading newspapers. And it's something like motivates us to try to enhance the effectiveness of this kind of so important activity in the public sector. So to develop machine learning model to assess how likely the given municipalities to suffer from resource mismanagement would enhance risk-based monitoring as suggested by INTOSAI, as I said, flagging municipalities at high risk of resource mismanagement, enhancing auditing efficiency by selecting which auditees or municipalities auditors should increase substantive tests for specific accounts or transactions, and assist the federal government in rendering accounts to international organisms like the World Bank and other financial institutions. I have been working together with the World Bank as an independent consultant, and they have highlighted how poor the quality of the accounts rendered by the, how can I say that? The transparency and the accountability of this, let me make the idea clear here. Let's say like the World Bank provides some financial resource to the central government in Brazil that transfers those resources to local governments to spend in education, in health assistance, and so on. Later on, local governments might render their accounts to the central government that consolidates all that information, what, where, and how they spend the money from the World Bank in order to the central government consolidates everything and shows to the central government, the World Bank, that those money, that money was actually invested, and the objectives of such a financing from the World Bank was achieved. The point is, nowadays, the World Bank, as far as I know, is not happy at all with the quality of the transparency in the accounts rendered by the federal government due to the lack of information the central government receives from local governments. And definitely, auditing mechanisms is completely aligned with this, and the lack of the quality of such auditing on local government expenditures might explain the low quality of such accounts rendered by the federal government to the funding institution. So how did we do that? We use data from Brazilian municipalities. Data is available at the local government's website as well as on federal government website. And we also needed to get some more detailed information based on the information access law that fortunately we have here in Brazil. And we organized that data and analyzed it following literature, but I want to spend time with that. So this is the big picture of the model. Tell you the truth, I won't spend time explaining this fancy picture. It's so nice. The co-authors did this. I'm very happy that they have done, but I will skip to the next slide already. So this is what we have found, that the classification model predicting whether a municipality had been previously accused to resource mismanagement was reasonable. The F1 score, that's the score that literature suggests that represents the actually or better measures the accuracy of the model, is quite good, 92%, and we are quite happy with that, although our sample is undue imbalanced. How do you call that undue imbalance? Because since the audit institution audits only 1% of the population of municipalities per year, we have so few municipalities that were audited. And on the top of that, very few of those that were audited, the audit institution was able to identify evidence of tunneling of public resources. So we needed that classification, that prior classification from the audit institution to forecast and to predict those that would be subject to that situation. So data selection, assembly, and treatment are the challenging steps in building this model. After overcoming this challenge, we run several models to identify the one with the best metrics. Models with the best accuracy were extra tree classifier, random forest, K neighborhood in the classifiers. We calculate the F1 score as well to compare the best ranking models. And the KNN model returned 0. Okay, no need to go through those numbers. Further work needs to be done to test alternative features and treatments, and the further steps include reviewing, debating the theoretical models, and achieving acceptance by academics and practitioners, as well as try to identify if we could somehow enhance the sample for more years in this a long time period of analysis, and who knows, other evidences of occurrence of not adequate allocation of public resources, in addition to those from the CGU. Now, I think that this forum is also a good opportunity to try to find and prospect collaboration opportunities. So yes, I really think that this project has potential for collaboration with colleagues from other jurisdictions, especially because fiscal centralization is not unique to Brazil. Many jurisdictions also has the same structure of the central government transferring resources to local governments and asking for accountability and auditing those numbers later on. So it would probably be interesting to identify in other jurisdictions. So it's quite doable in other jurisdictions, and we are open for collaboration in this regard. definitely those that would collaborate would need to know the auditing mechanism, the fiscal transfer mechanism from that specific jurisdiction, have the access to data, and definitely reading the proficiency in the language of those documents are written. That's it. So thank you, and I'll be able for discussion later on.
Thank you, Ricardo. Our next speaker is going to be Anna Jurikovic from the University of Rome. She's going to present the work, The Exploitation of Data for the Efficiency of Italian Public Transport, looking for a balance between innovative public companies and the regulatory gaps. Thank you, Anna.
Okay, I'm not so tall. Thank you. Okay, I've done this slide during my break lunch to help you to follow me, but maybe they are not perfect, and maybe I am not so capable to. Okay, okay. I'm discussing a topic which is really connected to the Prof. Petrillo topic, but it goes more specifically to see briefly how is the situation in the public services of transport in Italy. And everybody of us, everybody knows that public administrations have many benefits and advantages from using the data science in the large sense, so from using data collection, artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. And because it goes to, through these instruments, the public administration can make a more accurate and rapid decision, can improve the efficiency of public services, which is the topic of this brief talk, but can do many other things, like here, preventing fraud and tax evasion, optimizing the distribution of resources, and also promoting sustainability, and this is really connected to also public transport. So in the context of public transport, to not repeat what was already said, the Italian public transport companies are really implementing data science instruments, especially in the last period, because all the public politics, national politics, but also European politics, is going to the innovation of the urbanization and smart cities and everything, and so public transports are the key to go to this direction. And how these instruments, these tools can be used in the public transport sectors. For instance, they can be used to optimize routes, to predict demand-based, how through the use of machine learning algorithm, to analyze onboard data through the electronic ticketing, for instance, through the applications, or observing the passenger behavior. It is possible to monitor in real time the traffic, the delays, the deviation, and so to provide new route different from the planned route. How using GPS devices and sensors on the vehicles. In Italy, despite of all we can think for the situation that we have with public transport that is connected also with other reasons, we have examples of very innovative public transport companies. I do the example of ATM in Milano, GTT in Torino, ATAC in Rome. All of these public transport companies are using data science to planning the routes, the timetable of the vehicles, to make more efficient the service to citizens. And it is already innovative, but it can go to be more innovative, like other examples that we have worldwide and in our national framework. This is the Jerusalem Light Rail, which used an instrument that was invented by this startup, Axelion, an artificial intelligent instrument that permits to create an electronic dialogue between the cameras that are inside the vehicles, and these bring to many efficiency, because this permits to collect data about the vehicles and the passengers' behavior also. And through this dialogue, electronic video dialogue, they create a digital twin city where they simulate the problems and decide which kind of strategies they can take in the real, not digital city, Jerusalem. But also in Italy, some startup has proposed to use application that are already used. For instance, this key crime was, it is now used by the police of Milan, and they are proposing to give it to use it to with to sell it to the city of Turin for the public transport. And this is a bit problematic, because how it does work is has a software that permits to prevent robberies, harassment, violences, and it is an instrument of urban security, but it is based on a tool that is called chatbot. And practically is a digital assistant through the citizens that utilize the public transport can report harassment that they had of the scene. So they are like not legal report, because they are anonymous, and so we can see here legal problem with if we implemented this this kind of application in the public transports. So we already talked in the other Prof. Petrillo talk about the problems, the legal problems that are brought by using these tools, despite all the advantages for the citizens. So the risk of violating privacy or creating discriminatory algorithm. And so there is the necessity, especially in the public sector, to find a balance between the utilization of these tools and the guarantee of a lot of principle and rights, like transparency, first of all, but the non-discrimination principle, the privacy regulatory framework in general. And the problem is that in this moment, all the public transport companies are implementing really rapidly these really I say rapidly because I'm Italian. I hope you understand. These tools, but in a framework that is completely uncertain, because there are many acts, legal acts or just guideline recommendation in the national level and international level, European and not European, but there is not a unique text with a legal value that can orientate the companies of public transport to implement all of these necessary tools to build what the public politics are saying that we are building with all the money we are taking from Europe, so the smart cities, etc. But on the other hand, they have to invent the limits under they can act, because using some law that exists, but also using a lot of principles that are elaborated and extrapolated from many acts that are not even of a legal value. So here there are the most important regulations that I'm not reading, which are not specific for public transport, but they are the most are about the privacy and sorry, I told you. And then there are all there is the other framework, which is not strictly legal, but are guideline recommendations that provides different principles. And then there is also the contributions of the European Court of Justice that enrich all of these principles to create a framework that limits some behavior, but also that give the trust to the company to implement what they need to implement. They are the principle of transparency, so every time that a company provides information and collect data, the passenger that have to be absolutely and clearly informated and about all the proceeding also of this collection. The principle of consent, according to which companies should seek the explicit consent of passengers before collecting and using the personal data, and then there are the exception of the principle that I'm not saying now. The principle of purpose limitation, according which the companies can collect and use the data only for a specific reason and purpose, and not for others, which is connected to the principle of data minimizations that provide that the data should collect only for the necessary purpose provided for this collection, and the companies that has to avoid to collect sensitive or excessive data. And then the companies of public transport are, as all the other companies, has to ensure adequate levels of security to avoid the data, the personal data of passengers are lost or violated. And in the other hand, the companies has to allow passenger to access to their own data, and then also to request to rectificate this data or cancel data. So, in absence of a legal framework, which is they are finished, which is clear and has all the legal value, you understand that in this moment where all the public administrations are implementing a lot of data science tools, there is the problem that they could always be wrong because there is no a clear indication by the legal framework, national, international, European. And also when there are indications, they are not adequate. For instance, the indication about the liability. So inside the European strategies, there is the purpose of establishing a liability, which is said a strict liability or liability without fault. That means that the company is responsible for what happens, for the damage to the passenger and the client in general, even though it is not, has not any fault. But this kind of principle is not adequate in a case where there are instruments that are created by many different companies, so it's really different to go and to understand where is the liability. And so, in the end, the problem is that the technology is running and the legal framework is not capable to run behind technology innovation. And this open a very big problem, which is a problem that could also change the state, the balance of power in the state, like who has to provide these legal indications. If the procedure, the legal procedure of Parliament are not enough efficiency to run behind the technology innovation, maybe the government will be the legislator, as in Italy already is happening, or maybe it's even not enough, because it would be better goes with without all indication, but with a case law or principle, only by principle indication. So there are many possibilities that the innovation technologies can open, but I'm not to go through.
Thank you, Anna, for your presentation, and thank you, the four speakers, for the wonderful presentation. Now, we are going to open the microphone for questions. Does anyone has a question for the speakers?
Good afternoon. Thank you for all four presentations. They're all very interesting. I'll start with one question and maybe I'll come back with more. I'm still thinking about it. But my question will be to Anna, the last presentation. Since in two other roundtables, in this conference, we talked about how digitization and the use of data and methodological and computational methods are impacting like the public sector and companies and the private sector. So I was wondering, I don't know if in your research you look at these things, but do you have information about how do companies, transport companies in Italy, respond to this regulatory uncertainty? For example, are there cases of public contestation, or are there lawsuits ongoing against these companies due to any harm already done? Due to the use of users' data, for example. So if you have information on that and you could comment on some cases, I think that would be interesting. Okay, just one very specific question maybe to Ricardo, just to clarify, because I missed the point. misdisinformation. The historical data about mismanagement of municipalities that you mentioned is from these 1% of municipalities that have been actually audited. Okay, just to clarify that.
Oui, okay. No, I'm looking for cases about these problems in Italy, but especially for the public transport sector, I didn't find anything particularly determining, but could be that I'm not. I skipped something, but the problem is that is a very young and a very new, how do you say, movement. If you think that in Rome, the city where I live, we cannot trust public transport, so we don't use it usually. In Milan, the city, the situation is different, but I show how the biggest company of public transport in Rome is one of the most innovative. So these two sentences that I said that are going to different directions show you how they are implementing right now these tools. So of course there are citizens, but also public local authority that are not happy with some of this utilization, especially with the personal data and the application and GPS. But there is no case law experience that can answer to the question. And also in general in public services, the most important principles are taken from the European Court. So I think also the case law in Italy is trying to run behind what's happening. Also because it's not so split. It's almost like the Parliament procedure for making law.
So thank you for the question. I have the opportunity to clarify that now. Yes, you are right. Our dependent variable is binary. One, if the audit body has identified any specific case of resource tunneling among those 1% sample. And 0 if it has not identified. But the problem is that the lack of evidence of problems is not a proof of absence of problems. Just a matter of type 2 error that our sample has, and we don't have how to overcome that problem within that specific sample. That's why I suggested that we may try to increase the sample, not necessarily more years or more municipalities, but other auditing reports from other auditing institutions that also monitor those same municipalities in those same specific years to try to identify if there are more evidences of problems with the mismanagement of those resources to reduce type 2 error. Thank you for the question.
Just one more specific one then. So those reports, are they publicly available, or do you have to, through the information law, access
yes
law, you have to go through that, all through that?
Both ways, unfortunately both ways. That's quite more time consuming than just web scraping whatever is available, unfortunately.
Thank you. Any other question? Sure.
Okay, so like actually two questions, one for Anna and one like for Ricardo too. So like and I thought super interesting because like I work a little bit on urban economics and like people are using a lot of like data to understand like transit and other aspects, like super nice. And I even have like a PhD student here who is working with data on transit here from the city of Rio, and like I think a major challenge he faced was access to data, and like kind of like, and I understand as a researcher, maybe we want like collect every data and like make it relatively easy to access. So my question is like, how do you think these policies of getting the data also available to researchers, and in which way do you think this could be important, like to which extent like there should be regulation on that? So I think that this was like the type of question I had. And the one for Ricardo, like I thought like super interesting, but like a question I have, and I don't know if you guys thought much about the model with respect to that, is that when you're talking about like corruption or other mismanagement, a lot of that is like kind of a forward-looking behavior of the official, and so like these guys might be doing things very differently if they think the likelihood of being audited with those particular characteristics appear, instead of like, I don't know, a random audit of 1%. So like the responses in the long run might be different. And do you think there is a way of allow the model to be able to, with time, more data, like incorporate and these challenges and face these behavioral responses? So these are the questions.
Oh, of course, we would like, as researcher, all open access to data, and also the European Union address is that of provide the open access. For instance, when you apply for researching through the European Fund, they strictly require that all your publications are open access. This is a value that goes more. But about this kind of data I was talking about, we need to distinguish between personal data and study data. Like, I can use data about traffic, also people behavior, but without knowing which is the person. I think it is the reason, the solution. In crime, for instance, there is a very big data bank about the chromosome Y, chromosome Y, for understand like who killed someone. He is from East Europe, he's from American, but it's not really certain, because it depends, as you will say, was saying, on the more big is the bank, more different are the solutions. And so in this case, when the police understand that the killer came from East of Europe, for instance, they cannot utilize this information because the DNA was collected anonymously. So they can just decide to investigate in that direction, the direction of the East European, but they will never know who is the person with this kind of bank.
Wow. Back to your question, yeah, there are some anecdotes that we have noticed that municipalities that are not randomly selected for being audited, they celebrate after all. Once the auditing body announces those municipalities that will be audited, the mayors of the others just celebrate. They make a party and something like that. So I really believe that it will be really good if the auditing institutions implement more audit analytics in order to replace those small random sampling modeling. There are some challenges to implement that, as I got the point of your question. One of those challenges is mainly due to the auditing standards. We have international auditing and assurance standards, and they are the velocity that the standards get updated is much lower than the velocity of development of the technology and so on. So there is a process. This process has been initiated, let's say, 5, 8, 10 years ago, trying to convince the standard setters that the actual auditing standards that we have nowadays for private and public organizations are not adequate to the technological developments that we have available, and that it would increase the efficiency of auditing. On the other hand, as I said, the INTOSAI, the Association of Supreme Audit Institutions, they suggest that audit institutions all over the world implement a more risk-based auditing approach, but does not specify using of technology in order to work and identify which are the riskier to be audited. But I guess that this is an open door to make such an implementation. Now, since I have the mic, I would like to ask some questions too. Bruno, your paper is definitely very, very interesting and very opportunistic to the actual moment here in Brazil. And I wonder whether you could extrapolate that research not only from rainforest to other area, because we used to have forests all over the country, especially here in Rio de Janeiro. And if you look through the windows, you see the forest, but that's not natural forest. That was reforestation area. I have colleagues from CPDOC here, they know much better than me what I'm talking about here, but that used to be coffee tree plantation some centuries, 1 century ago. So if we take a picture nowadays, we would see there is a forest. But how would you be able to disentangle what is a natural forest, what's a reforested area, and if it would make any difference to your research problem? And to Pierre, there are some, you brought a very interesting issue here about privacy, personal data protection, as well as Anna also said about that, and definitely that's indeed relevant. Except by the very extreme case you brought about the sheriff office trying to predict who those 5-year-old kids today will become criminals 10 years from now or 20 years from now. There is a discussion on the use of technology, and like technology gives, technology takes. And the loss of privacy or mitigating our privacy is quite inevitable. Otherwise, we would not benefit from technology. I would like to hear how you react to this, if you may, please.
Thanks, Ricardo. So I think there are like some important points, like kind of where we can take these results and think more broadly. So like even when we were writing, kind of you mentioned like the forest here, like when we were writing the paper, the first version said like most tropical deforestation worldwide is quite recent. And then you go back like, yeah, this is true for Indonesia, this is true for the Congo, and like these are all places that share very similar history, even though we don't have the same type of data. And maybe like the process that are driving deforestation in different places might be different. But like in general, like this was kind of like a recent phenomenon. But then like when I was talking with my co-author, we were thinking, no, but there is the Atlantic rainforest here in Brazil that was like deforested mostly in the early 20th century. So like there are like older waves of tropical forest deforestation. So I think that this is like kind of I think like one thing, some of the lessons I guess we draw from the Amazon. I think we can like tentatively like imagine that similar things might be happening in other regions. But one of the things is like why we chose like to restrict our sample only to the Amazon and not like
all of that, because the indigenous data we have covers all of Brazil and even surrounding, yes, exactly, in other surrounding areas. One of the reasons was precisely because of these more recent deforestation. And so the issue is that like the data was collected in 1944, so it refers to what happened up to then, and we need to be able to clean way more the data to think of like deforestation happening in 1910s, 1920s, like in like for instance here like in Rio or other places. I have worked in other settings. Some of my work on for instance on the state of Paraná, that was a region that was extremely deforested through the 20th century, and I think kind of there might be some interesting things to think about that. And just to answer like briefly about like these, oh, like is it like deforestation or reforestation or things like that that we can do? Something we do in the papers is like we use like two different ways of measuring forests from two different data sets, and I think this brings like kind of like you think like it's easy to measure where forest is or the forest is, but like when you compare like different data, you see like the correlation is not so high. So basically we use like one is PRODS, that's the official one used to measure deforestation. That's irreversible. If an area was deforested, it always appears as deforested in the data. But the other data we use which is richer in some aspects because it has like some more information on land cover, is map biomas that shows like instead of deforestation shows forest cover, and then like forest cover allows for regeneration. So like in the end we find very similar results for both, but I think that's kind of like like so it's really driven by new at least in the setting of the Amazon. The results are driven by new deforestation, not like deforested areas not regenerating. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the question. I think that our presentation are very connected. Well, my approach is, I can say, it is a North American approach. That means that for me, privacy is more important than other issues and other rights. I would like to quote another case that was in Italy several years ago. We in Italy we have a strong problem related to the tax evasion. Well, the government, the parliament passed a law 7 years ago to authorize the government, the public agencies to control the taxpayers, to collect personal data from very different kind of data. In this way, the agencies create a dossier for each citizen and collect for each citizen all information relating all kind of shops, from the medicine to vacation to your child. And in this way, these agencies can control if you pay tax or not. So for me, this is a monster. So I understood the importance to use this data to contrast the evasion. But it's more important for me to maintain your privacy. You have other kind of instrument to contrast the situation. But you have to respect the personal life. In my opinion, the government cannot enter in this way in the life of the people. So I don't know if I answer to your question, but this is what I call North American approach, because it's not very common in Europe. Normally, our colleagues, has a different approach. It's a too liberal approach, I think, but this is my idea. But I keep this opportunity because I have a question to you. I study intangible cultural heritage in general, and my first topic of university research is the legal protection of intangible cultural heritage, and I also study the indigenous situation, not only in Brazil but around the world.
Well, my question is a political question to you. Okay, so if you do not want to answer, you are this right. After the change of the government here in Brussels, you think? I know the answer, but I want to to know by you. You think that the situation for the indigenous people and the policies for the indigenous people will change? And if yes, how?
I mean, as a social scientist, I try to avoid politics, but I'll try to answer, and this is not like 100% based on like kind of like research, but I think both of like kind of like the situation of the indigenous groups and the broader problems in the Amazon, which is like kind of we talked about like these violent extinctions and like land conflicts between like settlers and indigenous groups that are still like very much salient. And so I would imagine that there will be like some changes in policy, and I hope there might be positive impacts on deforestation and especially on like what's happening with indigenous populations. But I think one of the points of looking at history and understanding like what's happening is that many of those things that are driving these effects are occurring through local institutions, even local culture, and these are things that policy is much harder like to change. And so like as I mentioned, like I worked on other things like about like the geography of agriculture in the state of Paraná, some other settings that are very marked by these how can I say, this expansion of agricultural frontiers, and they were marked by a lot of conflicts with indigenous groups and by a lot of deforestation and other effects. Sure, now we have a very different, way more protection than we had like in 1940s. But I think these main drivers, they are, I think, kind of what we need to do in terms of policy would have to be something probably much more radical than like in terms of like solutions that like bring way more money to the table or other things to have like strong impacts, like kind of like stronger than like maybe like weaker impacts that have been going. So this is my take, but again, really extrapolating from research, so like I'm a little bit uncomfortable doing these predictions.
Good. Is there any other question that you would like to do, or between you speakers, do you have any other question? Yeah.
Back to me then. I would just like to thank Bruno as well for this very interesting research. Of course, me being from the School of Social Sciences and History, it's very interesting. I've never seen any other research project working on these historical settlements and now and today's deforestation, both accumulated and recent, ongoing. So this is very interesting. And yeah, and this proxy for other violent situations that indigenous groups have been suffering since ever, maybe since the encounter. So this is, yeah, very interesting. So two very specific questions. Where is Courtney Amandaju's archives and the data that you use? Is it digitized? Is it at USP? Because I did not know it was available. And you mentioned your co-authors. Are they anthropologists or from the environmental studies? Because I would like to know more about like the team working together, maybe. Because I was wondering that this could that bringing other expertises and backgrounds could be interesting to account for what you said, like the unobservables related to extinct groups and non-extinct groups in these locations that you identified that deforestation increased and is more likely to happen.
So first of all, I'd like also to thank this opportunity to present like to a broader like social science literature, like audience, because I think we benefit a lot from what people in other, like especially in anthropology, has done, and like kind of like the map of Curtin and Moendaju is like kind of an amazing source and super well cited in history and anthropology, and it's the type of work that like I feel like I don't know if there are like scholars doing like something so great like today, and I think it's an amazing data, and we strongly benefited from like kind of this digitization of that in 2017, which involved IBGE and IFAM, and I think this was very useful. Unfortunately, the original map got burned in Museu Nacional, but I think kind of like the type of data is there. It's great, and also like it's amazing. Like kind of I was kind of like super like surprised like how many things are so easily available when we look at the historical sources. And anthropologists and people have done amazing work on that. So like some sources we had to find physically, but most of them like we could find electronically digitized for us to look. And these are like kind of sometimes like letters from the 19th century, and kind of like this was great to do. In terms of the team, actually my co-author is an economist too. He's a more like an environmental economist. I have a more historical background, but I think this is definitely the type of project that like we benefited so much by what people in other areas are doing.
Great. So we are almost on time. So thanks again our speakers for the wonderful presentation, and let's give them a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Well, in the program is listed the closing remarks, I guess. No, we are at the end of a 3-day conference. Everybody's a little bit tired, I agree. Some of my colleagues have already left, but I think I can say on behalf of the steering committee of the Social Sciences Network, we have here colleagues from South Africa and from Russia. Our colleagues from China and Italy have already left. That it was very important for our network to have this meeting in presence here. No, we had the network is very young. It was created just before the pandemic. 2 months before the pandemic, we had the first meeting in Rome, and then only online meetings. And now it was the first time. It was a small conference because we were restricted to the institutions who were involved in this network. But I can say on behalf of our not association, our network, it's an alliance, that it was a pleasure to have you here. And also on behalf of FGV, not only the Social Sciences School, it was a pleasure to be your host. I hope you have enjoyed not only the conference, but our lovely city as well. And we have now the last coffee break and some time to socialize a little bit more. So thank you for coming.